It's interesting. I wasn't even really aware of this whole conversation, raw milk versus pasteurized milk, until I was in my early 30s, and I came across raw milk just through the internet and started to drink it, and it completely re-enabled or enabled me to be able to consume all kinds of dairy, just easily being able to digest it. And it's been such an amazing improvement in my quality of life, being able to access all the nutrition and the just beautiful deliciousness that is cheese and ice cream and milk and yogurt. And it's just been splendid. So I
Huh.
would love to be able to share this for more people to access this elevation in quality of life. And raw milk has been such an amazing part of that. And this is playing out collectively as well. Google searches for raw milk have increased 100% over the past year. So they've doubled, and it's really beginning to become a trending part of our culture due to this exact reason. It's just such a powerful force of nature.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason that we don't know more about, like allergies and to dairy, um, is because and the actual health benefits of raw dairy. I mean, and whether raw dairy really does uh, help the immune system. Is There's been a uh, in this transition to kind of factory food and this hostility to raw dairy, there has been a clampdown on research for to examine the benefits of raw milk. So when you talk to the FDA and the CDC, they have all kinds of research studies about the risks of raw milk and pathogens being found in raw milk, but they won't. Academics can't get funding to do to research the other side of raw dairy, the possible benefits. So that research has been really confined to Europe, where they have more of a tradition of raw milk. And they've come up with some interesting findings over there. Um, for instance, that uh, among children, especially who have a raw milk diet early on, seem to be have more resistance or less inclination to allergies, for example, and so that's but be nice if we could get some of that research done here, and also if we could get recognition of that research. So much hostility to raw milk in the public health community that they don't even want to take seriously the research that's come out of Europe. So they think they spend their time trying to find holes in the research rather than um, say how can we build on that.
What do you think that is, the hostility against it that you've observed?
I think that's a direct result of this new industry that kind of sprang up in as uh, uh, raw milk fell into disfavor, and pasteurized milk became the kind of the dairy of choice for the regulators um, and the public health community. So you had a huge industry build up over processing raw milk, basically pasteurizing it, but also homogenizing it. And so that became uh, a multi-billion-dollar industry. Still is, but it's in decline. But it became dominated by a few large corporations, and so they didn't want to see. Or let me just put it this way: they took raw milk as a threat, a potential threat to the new industry that they had built up. So it's a kind of a classic, you know, um, protect the existing industry and you know, don't let the upstarts get a foothold.
Yeah, yeah, that it does seem like the big business had quite a
It
heavy hand
it
to
is,
play.
and yeah, it is. It's, I mean, it actually has other ramifications, even aside from, how research is done. It's kind of made it uh, more convenient and more attractive for farmers to be in the pasteurized milk business than to be in the raw dairy business. And so, but so what? But part of what happened as part of this um, concentration of big processing dairies is that uh, they uh, they uh, they didn't want to have competition, and also they became a kind of a guaranteed, an easy way for dairy farmers to sell their product. So rather than have to figure out how you're going to get your raw milk to people when there are all kinds of regulations against it. It's much easier to just say, hey, we'll go with the we'll sign a contract with a big um, uh, you know processor and let them pick up the milk twice a week in a big truck and send us a check, and that's all we have to do. Well, of course, what happens in that system is eventually the processors uh, want to keep more and more of the profits for themselves and pay less and less to the dairy farmers for the product, and so they basically put a squeeze on the farmers, and so and what you've seen over the last 40 years is fewer and fewer dairy farms, and they because they can't afford to continue producing processed milk, and they've been scared from producing uh, and selling raw milk because all they hear about is um, people getting sick and how they'll get sued if they do sell raw milk and somebody gets sick. So they don't want to get near raw milk. So they just basically are forced more and more out of business. And and I mean, there are all these stories and about dairy farmers, you know, not only selling out to developers, but even committing suicide because they can't pay their bills. So it's been a big, the whole thing has been a big mess. I mean, the good news is that you say you have more options for buying raw milk. Of course, you live in one of the you live in one of the, I think it's about a dozen states that allow you to buy raw milk retail. So that's but things have changed so that it's possible to get raw milk even in places where it's not available retail. You can um, you can go out to a farm and buy it legally, or you can join a group of other people in a herd share or a cow share and get it delivered direct from a local farm. It's a little more work, a little more effort, but those mechanisms have come together over the last uh, 10 or 12 years. And I like to think partly because of the work I did in writing about it, beginning 15 years ago.
It's absolutely awesome. Yeah, you'd noticed, as your journalistic instincts must have just kicked in to say, hey, there's something happening here. Why are raw milk farmers being treated like drug dealers? They're being raided and being attacked. And it is interesting to say, hey, there's a corollary here between like raw milk and marijuana, which doesn't make any sense at all. But it's like state by state, it's different. And like there's probably no hope of a national, legalization of either, but every state can sort of take some, action to change the availability of these things as they see fit. And it's quite bizarre.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is.
When you reflect on some of the potential healing benefits of raw milk, I know most of the research has been done in Europe. what do you think is going on there between the raw milk, the pasteurization, and the healing benefits that some are observing through consuming maybe a raw milk only fast, or just adding it to the diets of young folks as they're growing up?
Well, I think I mean, the kind of the generally accepted um, uh, theory, or and backed by a certain amount of research, is that there are a good number of beneficial bacteria in raw milk, and and we've learned over the last 12, 15 years as well that a lot of our health is based on what happens in our gut and our gut bacteria. And so the microbiome is how it's referred to. And um, so, that's uh, I think that's probably the big thing. Um, And so, those good bacteria are present in raw milk. They're really present in to a large extent in kefir, and then also in raw milk cheese. It depends how much it's been heated. But the pasteurization, the heating of raw milk, um, kills off a lot of those good bacteria. So with pasteurized milk, you're not getting as many of the good bacteria that you get in unpasteurized milk, and that seems to be a big part of what's at play.
And I've heard some debate about the enzymes, which I guess potentially could be another microbial
Yeah,
sort of
yeah,
factor
no,
at play.
but they're also very sensitive to heat, and so when you pasteurize the milk, you lose some of those enzymes.
And within the realm of the risk at play, what have you seen contribute to that higher risk? Like why would some farms maybe be, what would be some red flags at certain farms that people would want to maybe not get raw milk from versus places where they would feel perfectly comfortable and safe acquiring raw milk from based on, the risks at play with making raw milk potentially dangerous?
Um, but one of the things that turns out that happens in dairy farming, and if you're a traditional dairy farmer and you're just selling your milk to the processor to pasteurize it, is that basically you have uh, there's a lot more you have a lot more leeway with regard to cleanliness. Um, so I mean, it's kind of it's kind of counterintuitive. You would think that farmers would be kind of wanting to keep their dairies clean, and regardless of what happens, but it takes more effort to keep your dairy really super clean than to just kind of let certain things go. And so, but when you're selling milk for processing, you have a certain amount of leeway because the milk is going to be zapped, it's going to be heated, and and so if there are any bad bacteria, any pathogens in the milk, they'll get um, you know obliterated by the pasteurization. So and in fact, one of the things I learned early on in writing about this is that if you uh, you know there are studies that show that milk that's going to be pasteurized is has more kind of pathogen, uh, uh, more pathogens than say raw milk coming from a farm that's just selling it uh, unpasteurized, because the dairy farms, the raw dairy farms, the exclusive raw dairy farms are inclined to keep their farms cleaner. That's kind of a generalization, but that's kind of that seems to be what's involved. So, in answer to your question, the one kind of red flag is if you're going to buy milk from a dairy that also sells it to uh, to the processors. You want to kind of know what they're doing to make sure that the raw milk is really produced under very clean conditions, because that milk can be a problem. And in fact, there have been uh, illnesses from dairies that kind of try to work both sides of the market here.
And that would link in tie in perfectly with your business background, understanding the incentives at play. Where if a dairy is going to be sending their milk to be zapped and pasteurized, there's very little incentive for them to put in the extra work to make it clean. But if they know it's going to be sold raw, if they know their livelihood and their entire farm depends upon this milk being clean and raw, then they're going to have a much higher incentive to keep it clean. And that this incentive misalignment seems to be maybe one of the root causes of a lot of the dairy sort of chaos that we're seeing between raw and pasteurized and quality that is available to the average milk drinker, dairy enjoyer out there.
Yeah, that certainly is one. The other, but even if you're just exclusively producing raw milk, you still have to be pretty careful, and because there have been illnesses associated with those raw dairy producers. So one of the things that's happened over the years is there's been the establishment of a really an industry watchdog, as it were. It's called the Raw Milk Institute, and it was actually started by a raw dairy farmer in California, Mark McAfee, um, who sells a lot of the raw milk in California. But he took it on himself after he had some outbreaks of illness, and other farmers had it. He established this Raw Milk Institute, which has not only establishes guidelines and standards for producing raw milk, but uh, uh, they really get involved in helping farmers do on-farm testing to monitor their milk and make sure that there are no pathogens in the milk, or there are no what are kind of there are no not a high number of bacteria that signify pathogens could be in the raw milk. It gets kind of involved in terms of the whole, bacteria counts and all that. But he so a lot of so this is a membership organization, and I forget how many um, members member farms are on are involved. I'm going to say maybe 30 or 40 around the country, but other farms which may not be members yet, but are in the process of kind of getting their act together, are you kind of playing by their standards, and so there are a lot of a growing number of raw dairy farms which are um, aware of these kind of standards and techniques, and buying equipment to establish the testing, on farm testing. So it's that all of that has helped. But that's, if you in answer to your question about red flags. I mean, there's the red flag I mentioned with farmers who maybe are trying to do mainly sell processed milk, but also sell raw milk on the side. But then, but even if you have a farm that's just selling raw milk exclusively, that's a good question to ask. Hey, where do you stand with the Raw Milk Institute? Are you aware of their standards? Do you do any on farm testing? Um, and if they say what's I never heard of that, that you may want to. I mean, you can ask further about it if they've had any issues with safety. I mean, some of them won't want to talk about it, but uh, but anyway, and I think you can also, if you really want to get serious about it, you can go to your Department of Agriculture and check if there have been any regulator shutdowns, for instance, or any of the farm. Because sometimes what will happen is they'll shut a farm down if they find listeria or E. coli 0157A7, they'll shut a farm down for a week or two, give the farmer a chance to kind of get things under control, and then they'll allow it to open it back up again.
Wow, those are great tips. Thank you for sharing those. And it is fascinating being in California, where I can buy it on the shelf next to the cheese and the yogurt. It's just there for sale in small stores. Meanwhile, I know I've been to Oregon, where you had to have a herd share, which you mentioned earlier. Very cool sort of workaround.